There are some places in this world that people forget exist. Small towns hidden behind mountains, neighborhoods tucked away from the main roads, communities where life moves slower because hope moves slower too. This is a story about a boy who grew up in one of those forgotten places. A boy who had nothing. A boy who would one day make the whole world cry with the sound of his music. But before all of that, he was just a kid with holes in his shoes and dreams that felt too big for someone like him. His name was. He lived with his mother in a tiny house made of concrete blocks and a roof that leaked when the rain came down hard. The walls were painted blue once, but the years had faded them into something gray and tired. There was no father in that house. He left before could even learn to walk. His mother never talked about him, and learned early not to ask questions that made her eyes go distant and sad. His mother was a cleaner. Every morning before the sun came up, she would put on her worn dress, tie her hair back, and walk to the bus stop. She cleaned houses for rich families on the other side of the city. Big houses with marble floors and golden doorknobs and rooms that nobody even used. She would come home late at night, her hands rough and cracked, smelling like bleach and floor polish. But she always smiled when she saw. She always had something for him. Sometimes it was bread from the kitchen of the family she worked for. Sometimes it was just a story about the beautiful things she had seen that day. Was 7 years old when his life changed forever. It was a Saturday, and his mother had to work extra hours at one of the biggest houses she cleaned. The family was hosting a party that night, and everything had to be perfect. She had no choice but to bring with her because there was nobody else to watch him. The house was like something from a dream, had never seen anything like it. The ceilings were so high that his neck hurt from looking up. There were paintings on the walls, flowers in crystal vases, and a staircase that curved like something from a fairy tale. His mother told him to sit in the corner of the kitchen and not touch anything. She gave him a piece of paper and a pencil and told him to draw quietly until she finished. But was 7, and 7-year-old boys are not very good at sitting still. When his mother went upstairs to clean the bedrooms, slipped out of the kitchen. He didn't mean to cause trouble. He was just curious. He walked through the hallway, his bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. He looked at the paintings, the statues, the strange and beautiful things that rich people filled their homes with. And then he found the room. It was at the end of the hallway, behind a door that was slightly open. Pushed it gently and stepped inside. The room was large and quiet, with tall windows that let in streams of golden afternoon light, but didn't notice the windows or the expensive curtains or the filled with leather-bound books. He only saw the piano. It sat in the center of the room like a sleeping giant. It was black and shiny, so polished that could see his own reflection in it. He had never seen a piano before, not in real life. He had seen them on the old television at his neighbor's house, watched men in fancy suits play them while orchestras swelled behind them, but he never imagined they would be so big, so beautiful, so alive. He walked toward it slowly like he was approaching something sacred. His heart was beating fast. He knew he shouldn't be there. He knew he would get in trouble, but something was pulling him forward, something stronger than fear. He reached out and touched one of the keys. The sound that came out made him gasp. It was soft and clear and perfect. It was like nothing he had ever heard before. He pressed another key, then another. Each note rang out into the quiet room, filling the empty space with something magical. Didn't know how long he stood there, pressing keys one by one, listening to the sounds they made. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. He was lost in a world he didn't know existed. And then he heard the scream. The lady of the house was standing in the doorway. She was tall and thin, with jewelry around her neck and anger in her eyes. She screamed for Smother. She screamed about the dirty boy touching her piano. She screamed about how people like them couldn't be trusted. Smother came running. Her face went pale when she saw standing next to the piano. She grabbed his hand and pulled him away, apologizing over and over again. Her voice was shaking. Her eyes were filled with tears she was trying not to let fall. They almost lost everything that day. The lady wanted to fire his mother on the spot. But another woman, maybe a relative or a friend, calmed her down. She said it was just a child being curious. She said no harm was done. His mother didn't say a word on the bus ride home. She just held his hand tightly and stared out the window. When they got home, she sat him down at the kitchen table and looked at him with eyes that were tired and sad and something else. Something that looked like understanding. She asked him why he did it. Why he touched the piano when he knew he wasn't supposed to. Didn't know how to explain it. He was only 7. He didn't have the words for what he felt, so he just said the only thing that made sense to him. He said the piano was calling him. His mother looked at him for a long time. Then she pulled him into her arms and held him tight. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. In that moment, something passed between them. An understanding that this wasn't just a child's curiosity. This was something deeper, something that would shape the rest of his life. That night couldn't sleep. He lay on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood outside. Dogs barking, people talking, a radio playing somewhere far away. But in his mind, he heard something else. He heard the piano. He got up quietly and found an old cardboard box in the corner of the room. He tore it apart and flattened it out. Then, with the same pencil his mother had given him that morning, he drew a piano. He drew the black keys and the white keys, spacing them out the way he remembered from that afternoon. When he was done, he sat in front of his cardboard piano and placed his fingers on the drawn keys. He closed his eyes and pressed down, imagining the sounds, hearing them in his head even though no real sound came out. From that night on, practiced on his cardboard piano every single day. He would sit in the corner of his tiny room, his fingers moving silently over the paper keys, playing songs that only he could hear. The other kids in the neighborhood thought he was strange. They laughed at him when they saw him through the window, pressing down on nothing, moving his fingers like a crazy person. But didn't care what they thought. He had found something that day in the rich woman's house. He had found a piece of himself that he didn't know was missing. And even though he had nothing, even though he was just a poor boy from a forgotten town with a cardboard piano and impossible dreams, he made himself a promise. One day he would play for real. One day the whole world would hear his music. He didn't know how, he didn't know when, but he believed it with every part of his young heart. And sometimes, belief is where every great story begins. Years passed, and the little boy with the cardboard piano grew into a teenager. Was 15 now, taller, thinner, with hands that had grown rough from work. But his eyes still held that same fire, that same hunger that had been born the day he touched the piano in the rich woman's house. Life had not gotten easier. If anything, it had gotten harder. His mother's health was not what it used to be. Years of scrubbing floors and breathing cleaning chemicals had taken their toll. She coughed at night, a deep rattling sound that scared more than he would ever admit. But she still went to work every morning. She still came home every night with tired eyes and a smile just for him. Did everything he could to help. After school, he worked. He carried groceries for the old women at the market. He washed cars in the parking lots of shopping centers. He collected bottles and cans from the streets and sold them to the recycling center for a few coins. Every peso he earned, he split in two. Half went to his mother for food and medicine. The other half went into a small tin box he kept hidden under his mattress. That box held his impossible dream. He was saving for piano lessons. Had done the math 100 times. Piano lessons at the music school in the city cost more money than his mother made in a month. At the rate he was saving, it would take him years to afford even a few weeks of instruction. But he kept saving anyway. He kept believing anyway, because giving up felt like dying and was not ready to die. He still practiced on his cardboard piano every night. Over the years, he had made new ones as the old ones fell apart. He had watched videos on the old computer at the public library, studying how real pianists moved their fingers, how they held their wrists, how they swayed with the music. He memorized everything he could. He taught himself to read the basics of sheet music from a torn book he found in the trash behind a bookstore. But he knew it wasn't enough. He knew that to really play, to really become what he dreamed of becoming, he needed a teacher. He needed a real piano. And then one afternoon, everything changed. Was walking home from the recycling center, his pockets heavy with coins, when he passed by a part of town he didn't usually go to. It was an old neighborhood, full of crumbling houses and overgrown gardens. Most of the homes looked abandoned, but from one of them heard something that made him stop in his tracks. Music, piano music. It was faint, drifting out from a broken window like a ghost, but it was beautiful, more beautiful than anything had ever heard. The notes were sad and slow, filled with a loneliness that understood deep in his bones. He followed the sound. The house was small and falling apart. The paint was peeling, the roof was sagging, and weeds had taken over what used to be a garden. But the music kept playing, drawing closer like a spell. He stood at the gate for a long time, just listening. When the music finally stopped, he found the courage to knock on the door. The man who opened it was old, very old. His hair was white and wild, his face was lined with wrinkles, and his eyes were cloudy with age. He looked at with suspicion, the way people in poor neighborhoods looked at strangers. Didn't know what to say. His mouth was dry, his heart was pounding, but he forced the words out anyway. He told the old man that he heard him playing. He told him it was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. And then, before he could stop himself, he told the old man everything. About the day in the rich woman's house, about his cardboard piano, about his dream that felt more impossible with every passing year. The old man listened without saying a word. When finished, there was a long silence. Then the old man asked a question that surprised him. He asked to show him his hands. Held out his hands, palms up. They were rough and calloused, stained from work, with dirt under the fingernails. He felt ashamed. These were not the hands of a pianist. These were the hands of a poor boy who carried groceries and collected trash. But the old man looked at them differently. He studied them carefully, turning them over, pressing the fingertips gently. And then he said something that would never forget. He said these were good hands, strong hands, hands that knew hard work. He said the best pianists he ever knew had hands just like these. The old man's name was Roberto. Once upon a time, he had been somebody. He had played in concert halls across the world. He had performed for presidents and kings. His name had been printed in newspapers, spoken on radio stations, celebrated by people who understood what true musical genius sounded like. But that was a long time ago. Life had not been kind to Roberto. He had lost people he loved. He had made mistakes he couldn't take back. He had watched his fame fade and his fortune disappear until all he had left was a broken house and an old piano that was as tired as he was. He had not taken a student in over 20 years. He had told himself he was done with teaching, done with music, done with caring about anything at all. But something about changed his mind. Maybe it was the fire in the boy's eyes. Maybe it was the story about the cardboard piano. Maybe Roberto saw something of his younger self in this poor kid who refused to give up on an impossible dream. Whatever the reason, Roberto made an offer. He would teach him, not for money because had none, but in exchange for lessons would come to his house 3 times a week. He would clean, do repairs, fetch groceries, and help the old man with whatever he needed. And in return, Roberto would give him everything he knew about the piano. Couldn't believe what he was hearing. He asked Roberto to repeat it, certain he had misunderstood. But the old man just smiled, the first real smile had seen on his face, and told him to come back tomorrow. From that day on, life had a new rhythm. He woke up early, went to school, worked his jobs, and then walked 2 hours to Roberto's house. 2 hours there, 2 hours back, 3 times a week, rain or shine, hot or cold, it didn't matter. Nothing could stop him. Roberto was not an easy teacher. He was strict and demanding and sometimes harsh. He made practice the same scale 100 times until it was perfect. He yelled when got lazy. He pushed him harder than anyone had ever pushed him before. But he also believed in him, and that belief meant more to than anything else in the world. For 3 years, learned everything Roberto had to teach: technique, theory, history, the mathematics of music, the poetry of rhythm, the way a single note could hold an entire universe of emotion. Roberto gave him everything, poured all his knowledge into this boy like water into an empty vessel, and drank it all in. He practiced until his fingers ached. He studied until his eyes burned. He played Roberto's old piano until the keys knew the shape of his hands better than he knew himself. Then one winter morning, arrived at Roberto's house to find the door open and the piano silent. Roberto had passed away in his sleep. Peacefully, the neighbors said, with a small smile on his face like he was dreaming of something beautiful. Stood in that empty house for a long time, tears running down his face, not knowing what to do or where to go. The man who had changed his life was gone. The dream that had finally started to feel possible now felt further away than ever. But then he found the letter. Roberto had left it on the piano, addressed to. In shaky handwriting, the old man had written his final words to his student. He told that teaching him had given his life meaning again. He told him that he was proud of the man was becoming. And he told him that the piano, the same piano they had spent 3 years playing together, now belonged to. It was the first thing had ever truly owned. And holding that letter, standing in that quiet room, made a promise to the man who had believed in him when nobody else did. He would not waste this gift. He would not let Roberto's faith be for nothing. He would make the whole world hear his music. And he would make his teacher proud. 4 years had passed since Roberto left this world. 4 years since inherited the old piano and the promise that came with it. He was 19 now, no longer a boy but not quite a man. Somewhere in between, still searching, still dreaming, still playing every single day like his life depended on it. Because in many ways it did. Had continued to work and practice, practice and work. The piano sat in his tiny room taking up almost all the space. His mother had to squeeze past it just to reach the kitchen, but she never complained. She understood what that piano meant to her son. She understood that it was more than wood and strings and ivory keys. It was hope. It was purpose. It was everything. Played whenever he could. Early mornings before the neighborhood woke up. Late nights when the streets finally went quiet. He played until his fingers knew every song Roberto had taught him, and then he learned new ones on his own. He played until the music lived inside him like a second heartbeat. But playing alone in a tiny room was not enough. Knew that. Roberto had told him once that a musician who never performs is like a bird who never flies. The talent is there, but it means nothing if nobody ever hears it. Needed to be heard. One evening, he was at the public library, using the old computer to search for piano videos like he always did. But this time, something different caught his eye. An advertisement on the side of the screen. A national piano competition, held once a year in the capital city. Open to anyone under the age of 25. The winner would receive a cash prize and a full scholarship to the country's most prestigious music conservatory. Read the words again and again, his heart beating faster with each pass. This was it. This was his chance. The only chance he might ever get. He wrote down all the information. The date, the location, the requirements. He needed to submit a video recording of himself playing, and if the judges liked what they heard, he would be invited to compete in person. For the next 2 weeks, barely slept. He practiced the piece he had chosen, a complicated work by Chopin that Roberto had spent months teaching him. He recorded himself on a borrowed phone, deleted it, practiced more, recorded again. over and over until he had something he wasn't completely ashamed of. He submitted the video and waited. The weeks that followed were the longest of his life. Every day felt like a year. Every night was filled with dreams of rejection, of failure, of being told he wasn't good enough. He tried to prepare himself for disappointment. He told himself that even if he didn't get selected, at least he had tried. At least he had been brave enough to put himself out there. But deep down, he wanted it so badly that it hurt. Then the letter came. His mother was the one who found it in the mailbox. She brought it inside with shaking hands, her eyes wide, took it from her and stared at it for a long moment, afraid to open it, afraid that his dream was about to end before it even really began. He opened it anyway. He had been selected. Out of hundreds of applicants from all over the country, had been chosen as one of the 20 finalists. He was going to the capital. He was going to compete. His mother cried. They held each other in that tiny kitchen and cried until they had no tears left. But the joy didn't last long. Reality set in quickly, cold and harsh. The competition was in 3 weeks. The capital was hundreds of miles away. Needed money for the bus ticket, money for a place to stay, money for food, money he didn't have. He sold everything he could. His watch, which had been a gift from Roberto, his old bicycle, even some of his clothes. His mother tried to give him her savings, the small amount she had put away for emergencies, but refused. He couldn't take that from her. He wouldn't. In the end, it was the neighbors who saved him. Word had spread through the community about the poor boy with the piano who had been selected for a national competition. People who had known his whole life, who had watched him grow up, who had seen him practice on cardboard and walk 2 hours to an old man's house, came together to help. They gave what they could. Some gave money. Some gave food for the journey. One old woman gave him a dress shirt that had belonged to her late husband. It was a little faded and a little too small, but it was the nicest thing had ever owned. The night before he left, sat at his piano and played for his mother. He played all the songs she loved, all the songs that made her smile. When he finished, she took his face in her rough, cracked hands and looked into his eyes. She told him that no matter what happened, she was proud of him. She told him that he had already won just by getting this far. She told him that his father, wherever he was, would be proud too. Didn't know about that last part, but he held on to the rest. The bus ride to the capital took 14 hours. Sat by the window, watching the countryside change from familiar to foreign. Small towns gave way to bigger towns. Bigger towns gave way to the city. And the city was like nothing had ever seen. Tall buildings that touched the clouds. Streets filled with cars and noise and people rushing everywhere. Everything was fast and loud and overwhelming. The competition was held in a grand concert hall in the center of the city. Had seen pictures of it online, but the pictures didn't do it justice. The building was massive, with tall columns and wide stairs and doors that looked like they were made for giants. Stood at the bottom of those stairs for a long time, just staring up, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. He walked inside. The lobby was filled with people, young pianists from all over the country, surrounded by their families and teachers and supporters. Looked around and felt his stomach drop. These people were different from him. Everything about them screamed wealth and privilege. The boys wore tailored suits that fit perfectly. The girls wore elegant dresses that probably cost more than his mother made in a year. They carried themselves with confidence, chatting and laughing like they belonged here, because they did belong here. This was their world. Looked down at himself, his faded shirt, his old pants, his shoes with the holes in the soles that he had tried to cover with pieces of cardboard. He looked like exactly what he was, a poor boy from a forgotten town who had no business being in a place like this. And the others noticed. A group of contestants standing nearby looked over at him. One of them, a tall boy with slick-back hair and an expensive watch, whispered something to his friends. They laughed. Pretended not to hear. He walked to the registration desk and gave his name. The woman behind the desk looked at him with barely hidden surprise, then handed him his number. 17. He was contestant number 17. He found a corner and sat down alone. He tried to make himself invisible. He tried to focus on the music, on the piece he had practiced 1,000 times, on Roberto's voice in his head telling him to breathe, to feel, to let the music speak. But the whispers followed him. Look at his shoes. Look at his shirt. Where did he come from? Did he get lost? Maybe he's here to clean the floors after the competition. Heard every word. Each one landed like a punch to his chest. He kept his eyes down, kept his hands steady, kept telling himself that it didn't matter, that the piano didn't care what he wore, that the music didn't see his poverty. But it hurt, God, it hurt. The tall boy with the slick-back hair walked over to him. He stood right in front of him, blocking his view, forcing him to look up. The boy smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had never been told no in his entire life, someone who had always had everything handed to him. He asked where his teacher was, said he didn't have one, not anymore. The boy laughed. He asked where studied, told him the name of his small town. The boy had never heard of it. Nobody had ever heard of it. Then the boy leaned in close and said something that burned itself into his memory forever. He said that competitions like this were for real musicians, not charity cases. He said should go home before he embarrassed himself. Then he walked away, still laughing, his friends patting him on the back like he had just told the funniest joke in the world. Sat there alone, his eyes stinging with tears he refused to let fall. For a moment, just one terrible moment, he thought about leaving. He thought about walking out of that beautiful building, getting back on the bus, and going home to his tiny room and his mother's arms and his piano that nobody would ever hear. But then he heard Roberto's voice, clear as day, like the old man was sitting right beside him. The piano doesn't see your clothes, it only hears your soul. Closed his eyes, he took a deep breath. He let the anger and the shame and the hurt settle into something else, something harder, something stronger. He wasn't going anywhere. These people could laugh at his shoes. They could mock his shirt. They could whisper about where he came from and who he was and what he didn't have. But when he sat down at that piano, none of that would matter. When he played, they would hear him. They would all hear him. The hours crawled by like years. Sat in that corner, watching contestant after contestant walk through the doors that led to the stage. Some came back smiling. Others came back with tears in their eyes. All of them came back looking like they had just faced something bigger than themselves. Listened to the muffled sounds of music through the walls. He couldn't hear the notes clearly, but he could feel the vibrations, the rhythm, the life of each performance. These were talented people, trained people, people who had spent their whole lives preparing for moments exactly like this. And soon it would be his turn. His number was 17. The numbers climbed slowly. 12, 13, 14. With each one's heart beat a little faster, his palms grew sweaty, his mouth went dry. He tried to calm himself down. He closed his eyes and thought about his tiny room back home. He thought about his mother's hands, rough from years of work, holding his face and telling him she was proud. He thought about Roberto, sitting at his old piano, teaching him that music was not about perfection. It was about truth. 15, 16. Then they called his number. 17. Stood up. His legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. He wiped his palms on his pants and walked toward the doors. He could feel eyes on him. He could hear the whispers starting up again. But he kept walking, one foot in front of the other, just like he had walked to Roberto's house 1,000 times, just like he had walked through life one step at a time, never giving up. The doors opened and stepped onto the stage. The concert hall was enormous, bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Rows and rows of red velvet seats stretched out before him, climbing up toward the ceiling like a mountain. The walls were decorated with gold trim and crystal chandeliers that sparkled like stars. And in the center of it all, sitting under a single spotlight, was the piano. It was a grand piano, the grandest had ever seen, black and shining with keys that seemed to glow in the light. It was beautiful, it was terrifying, it was everything. Walked toward it slowly. His footsteps echoed in the silence. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching him. The judges sat in the front row, their faces blank and unreadable. The audience filled the seats behind them, a sea of strangers waiting to see what this poor boy in the faded shirt could do. He reached the piano and stood there for a moment, just looking at it. His reflection stared back at him from the polished surface. He saw a young man with tired eyes and rough hands and clothes that didn't belong in a place like this. But he also saw something else. He saw the boy who had touched a piano for the first time in a rich woman's house. He saw the teenager who had practiced on cardboard every night. He saw the student who had walked 2 hours in the rain just to learn one more song. He saw someone who had earned the right to be here. Sat down on the bench. He adjusted his position, feeling the smooth wood beneath his fingers, the cool touch of the keys. He took a deep breath, then another. He could hear his own heartbeat, loud and fast like a drum in his chest. The hall was completely silent, waiting. Closed his eyes. He thought about his mother, alone in their tiny house, probably praying for him right now. He thought about Roberto, who had given him everything and asked for nothing in return. He thought about all the people who had laughed at him, who had told him he didn't belong, who had looked at his shoes and his shirt and decided he was nothing. And then he thought about the music. The music that had saved him. The music that had given him hope when he had nothing else. The music that lived inside him like a fire that refused to go out. He opened his eyes. He placed his fingers on the keys. And he began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 floated into the air like a whisper. Soft and gentle, almost hesitant, like a child taking its first steps. Let the music guide him. Let it flow through his fingers without forcing it, without trying to control it. The melody grew. It swelled and expanded, filling the concert hall with sound. Leaned into the piano, his body moving with the rhythm, his eyes half closed, his face lost in concentration. He wasn't thinking about the judges anymore. He wasn't thinking about the audience or the other contestants or the boy who had told him to go home. He wasn't thinking about anything at all. He was just feeling. He felt the years of struggle, the poverty, the hunger, the shame of being the poor kid who couldn't afford real piano lessons. He felt the loneliness of practicing alone in his tiny room while other kids played outside. He felt the weight of his mother's sacrifices, all the hours she had worked just to keep him fed and clothed and dreaming. And he poured all of it into the music. The piece grew more intense. The notes came faster, harder, crashing into each other like waves against rocks. His fingers flew across the keys with a speed and precision that surprised even him. It was like the piano had become part of his body, an extension of his soul, speaking the words he had never been able to say out loud. He played the pain of losing Roberto, the grief that had nearly broken him, the promise he had made to the old man who had believed in him when nobody else did. He played the anger of being mocked and dismissed, the hurt of being judged for things he couldn't control, the fire that had kept him going when giving up would have been so much easier. And then, as the piece reached its final movement, something shifted. The music softened. The storm gave way to something quieter, something tender, played the love he felt for his mother, the gratitude he felt for every person who had ever helped him, the hope he still carried even after everything that maybe, just maybe, his dreams could come true. The final notes hung in the air like a prayer, soft, pure, beautiful. And then silence. Sat at the piano, his hands still resting on the keys, his chest rising and falling with each breath. He didn't move. He couldn't move. He had given everything he had, every piece of himself, and now he was empty. For a moment nothing happened. The silence stretched on, heavy and thick. Then looked up, and he saw something he would never forget for the rest of his life. People were crying. The judges in the front row had tears streaming down their faces. The audience behind them was the same. Men and women, young and old, all of them wiping their eyes, sniffling, trying to hold back sobs. The boy with the slick-back hair, the one who had told to go home, was sitting in the third row. His face was wet. His hands were shaking. He looked at like he was seeing him for the first time. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire concert hall was frozen in that moment, held captive by what they had just witnessed. Then one person stood up, then another, then another. And then the whole hall was on its feet, clapping, cheering, crying. The sound was like thunder, rolling through the room, shaking the walls, filling every corner with noise. Sat at the piano, overwhelmed, unable to process what was happening. Tears were falling down his own cheeks now. He couldn't stop them. He didn't want to stop them. He had done it. He had made them hear him. Not just his music, not just his technique. His soul. The applause went on, wave after wave, like it would never end. People were calling his name. Strangers were reaching toward the stage like they wanted to touch him. Stood up slowly. His legs were trembling. He bowed the way Roberto had taught him, deep and respectful. And as he stood there in that grand concert hall, surrounded by people who had finally seen him for who he really was, he thought about the little boy who used to practice on cardboard. That boy had believed, against all odds, that one day the world would hear his music. And tonight, that boy's dream had finally come true. The rest of that night felt like a dream. Walked off the stage in a daze, his ears still ringing with the sound of applause, his heart still pounding from everything that had just happened. People reached out to shake his hand as he passed. Strangers smiled at him with wet eyes. The same people who had whispered about his shoes and his shirt now looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. He found a quiet corner backstage and sat down, trying to catch his breath, trying to make sense of it all. His hands were still trembling. He looked at them, these rough hands that had carried groceries and washed cars and collected bottles from the street. These hands that had practiced on cardboard for years. These hands that had just made an entire concert hall weep. He didn't know if he had won. The competition wasn't over yet. There were still a few more contestants to perform, and then the judges would deliberate, and then the results would be announced. Tried to tell himself that it didn't matter, that the applause was enough, that being heard was enough. But deep down, he wanted to win. He wanted it more than he had ever wanted anything. The final contestants performed, and then the waiting began. All 20 finalists were gathered in a large room backstage, sitting in rows of chairs, staring at the door where the judges would eventually appear. Some people talked nervously. Others sat in silence, kept his eyes on the floor, replaying his performance in his head, wondering if he could have done anything better, wondering if it was enough. An hour passed, then another. And then the door opened. The head judge walked in, a tall woman with silver hair and a serious face. She held an envelope in her hands. The room went completely silent. She thanked everyone for participating. She said that the level of talent this year was extraordinary. She said that the judges had a very difficult decision to make. His heart was beating so hard, he thought it might burst out of his chest. The woman opened the envelope. She looked at the paper inside, and then she spoke. Third place went to a girl from the northern region. She screamed and hugged her parents, tears streaming down her face. Second place went to a boy from the capital. He nodded quietly, trying to hide his disappointment. And then the woman paused. She looked out at the remaining contestants, and for just a moment her eyes found. First place, she said. The winner of this year's national piano competition. the recipient of the full scholarship to the National Conservatory of Music. She said his name. Didn't move. He couldn't move. He sat there frozen, certain he had heard wrong, certain this was some kind of mistake. But then people were turning to look at him. People were clapping. People were calling his name, the same name the judge had just spoken, and suddenly it was real. It was real. He had won. Stood up slowly, his legs shaking so badly he thought he might fall. He walked to the front of the room, each step feeling like a mile. The head judge shook his hand and gave him the envelope containing his prize. She looked at him with something like respect, something like admiration. She told him quietly, so only he could hear, that in 30 years of judging competitions, she had never seen anything like his performance. She told him that he didn't just play the piano, he spoke through it. And that was a gift that couldn't be taught. Thanked her, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't trust himself to say anything more. The rest of the night was a blur of handshakes and photographs, and people asking him questions about his life, his training, his story. Reporters wanted interviews. Music schools wanted to offer him positions. Everyone wanted a piece of the poor boy who had made the whole country cry. But there was only one thing wanted. He found a quiet hallway and pulled out his phone. His hands were still shaking as he dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. And then his mother answered. She knew something had happened. She could hear it in his silence. She asked him what was wrong, her voice tight with worry. Couldn't speak. The tears came before the words, spilling down his cheeks, choking him. And then finally, he managed to say it. He told her he won. The sound his mother made on the other end of the phone was something would carry with him for the rest of his life. It was joy and relief and pride and love, all mixed together in one beautiful, broken sob. They cried together, mother and son, separated by hundreds of miles but connected by something stronger than distance. She told him his father would be proud. She told him Roberto would be proud. She told him she had always known, from the moment he touched that piano in the rich woman's house, that he was meant for something special. Didn't know what to say, so he just said the only thing that mattered. He said thank you, for everything, for every sacrifice, for every long day of work, for believing in him when believing seemed foolish, for letting him keep that cardboard piano in the corner of his room when they barely had space for anything else. He said he loved her. And she said she loved him too. The weeks that followed changed everything. A video of his performance was posted online, and within days it had been viewed by millions of people around the world. The story spread like wildfire. The poor boy from the forgotten town, the cardboard piano, the old teacher who gave him everything, the moment he made an entire concert hall weep. People were moved by his story. Donations poured in from strangers who wanted to help his family. His mother finally retired from cleaning houses. For the first time in her life, she could rest. Bought her a small house with a garden, nothing fancy but clean and warm and hers. Music schools from other countries reached out with offers. Famous conductors wanted to work with him. Opportunities that had never even dared to dream about were suddenly within his reach. But never forgot where he came from. The boy with the slick-back hair, the one who had told him to go home, found him backstage after the awards ceremony. Expected mockery. He expected excuses. But instead, the boy just stood there, his eyes red, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume. He apologized. Not a quick, throwaway apology, but a real one. He said he had spent his whole life being given everything, and he had never once appreciated it. He said that watching play had shown him what it looked like to truly earn something, to truly want something, to truly deserve something. Didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. The boy took it. And something shifted between them, not friendship exactly, but understanding, respect. Years later became one of the most celebrated pianists of his generation. He performed in concert halls across the world, in places Roberto had once played, in cities had only ever seen in photographs. Critics called him a genius. Audiences adored him. His name became synonymous with passion, with authenticity, with music that could touch the human soul. But his greatest pride was not the awards or the fame or the money. It was the school he built in his. A free music school for children who had nothing. Children like he had once been. Children with dreams too big for their circumstances and talent too bright to be wasted. At the entrance of the school hung a framed piece of cardboard. The same cardboard he had drawn piano keys on as a 7-year-old boy, all those years ago. Beneath it, he placed a small plaque with words that he hoped would inspire every child who walked through those doors. It read, "Your circumstances do not define your destiny. Your soul does." And every day in that small school in that forgotten town, children sat at real pianos and learned to play. They learned that poverty was not a prison, that dreams were not foolish, that with enough heart, enough work, enough belief, anything was possible. Because a boy with nothing had proven it to the world. And his music would echo forever.